Of
So,
course.
Catherine, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out for the show today. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Hey, you're welcome.
So, before we get into your history and your work and your experiences, which we've kind of touched on before we got on here, I want to know first and foremost, one of the biggest things that we've lived through in recent memory is this pandemic. How did you get
Sure.
through it, and how has it ultimately affected the way that you do things now?
I would say the biggest thing for me, I am immunocompromised. So I'm on immunosuppressants. I have a autoimmune system disorder called rheumatoid arthritis. And so for me, it was terrifying. It was probably the most terrifying period of my life where so many people in my life were not willing to protect me by getting a vaccine or staying in the house. I mean, I had people violating, orders and having group sex parties and random stuff where they were just totally disregarding the risk they were putting people at. And I'm fortunate I run my own business, and the company I was working with had just got acquired 3 days before the state of California shut down. So I had definitely had a distraction
Yeah.
during that time. If I didn't, I don't know where I would be. Like I have a lot of friends who are actors and musicians who had nothing to do during that time but freak out. I would say the biggest thing that changed is my ability to put up with idiots.
Yeah. Yeah.
It weeded out a lot of people who really didn't care about me. And that was some family members, and that was people who I'd known since high school and thought were close friends who were going off and disregarding stay at home orders and saying, "Oh, this isn't a big deal. If you get sick, you'll get better," when that's not how it would have been for me if
Yeah.
I'd gotten COVID before vaccines. And I called it the self-cleaning oven. It got rid of all the junk in my life.
Yeah.
I refocused. I decided to go back to school during that time and kind of shift out of working in the tech sector to working in more in my advocacy and my healthcare. So I am finishing up my master's in public health. I would have never started that journey without the pandemic really making me realize what was important. I bought a tiny home in 2 acres in wine country that I never would have done to simplify my life if it hadn't been for the pandemic. The pandemic was a very key thing in realizing what was important in my life. It really has fundamentally changed how I move forward. I think I move forward with both less and more empathy at the same time. Less empathy for people who don't believe in science and don't believe in those things, and more empathy for people like me who had to live through people basically telling them really hateful things. I had a friend, well, a so-called friend, tell me it's a cleaning out of the gene pool for people like you.
Wow. That's ugly.
That's, yeah, it got really ugly because people were scared and I understood where it was coming from. But to hear that from someone I'd known since I was 12 years old was a gut punch. But it made me focus in on the people who were really important.
Totally.
That's not my family of choices or my family of origin as much as it is my family of choice, and
Yeah.
the people who were really understanding and empathetic, even though they had sympathy. And I think during the pandemic, they found empathy when they were losing friends and getting sick and understanding a little bit more of what I go through on a daily basis. So,
Yeah, interesting. So, on paper, you're a product designer, social entrepreneur, disability advocate. There's a lot that goes into it. But if we were to simplify what you do on a daily basis, I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids. It's career day. The kid in the back of the room is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer him?
I'm a creator, first and foremost. All those things have creativity attached to them. That's the simple thing is I'm a creator and an advocate. I speak up for people who can't, and I create things that don't exist before I sit down to do my job. And that takes on many different forms, as you just mentioned. I just got tired just hearing that.
Yeah.
I forget all I do. It's a very different conversation when you're looking at the idea of, oh my gosh, when I start putting titles to what I do, I get tired. When I'm just living it, I don't think about it in that way.
Well said. So let me ask you this. We had kind of mentioned off camera, and so you've had some diagnoses from an early age. Has that been the precursor to you doing and being creative and kind of filling things that like overshadow that? How does that work for you? Because you're obviously
Oh,
successful and busy.
yeah, absolutely. I think my creativity came out of spending time at home, being sick, spending time in and out of hospitals and doctors' offices. It was just, and I come from a family that has created, you either fall on the creative side or the analytical side of my family. My dad's an engineer, my mom was a business consultant and a nurse, and then my uncle was an opera singer, my aunt was an artist. So we kind of fall on both ends of the spectrum. And I think I just kind of gravitated to things I could do lying in bed or things I could do. And my mom has a book, a very popular Shel Silverstein book when I was a kid called The Giving Tree. And when I was 8 or 9 years old, I wrote a different ending at the back of the book, and my mom still has. So I guess it's just kind of always been innate in me to be creative. But I think it definitely filled in gaps and of sadness and things, and it still does to this day. You know, when I'm struggling health-wise, there's always something I can be doing that feels productive, and creative stuff was always what I landed on.
So talk to me a little bit about what's going on health-wise. What were you diagnosed with early on, and how did you get to a point where you got a handle on it and it wasn't something that you felt was a limitation?
So I was born with a cord around my neck. So I was born, my dad says the prettiest shade of blue he ever saw because I'm his firstborn kid.
Uh-huh.
That caused a very mild form of cerebral palsy and developmental delays, pretty much from birth. So I walked late. I had problems with my vision when I was a kid, still do, but this is old lady vision now. But
Yeah.
had strabismus surgery when I was 2. I started having seizures when I was around 7 or 8 is how I remember it. I always just say I had both my cerebral palsy, uh, all 3 of my diagnoses before the age of 10. So I started having seizures around the age of 7 or 8, and then I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis around that same time, within probably a year or 2. Um, and I would say, honestly, I never saw it as a limitation because it was never really presented as such in my family. I don't think it was until I was an adult, like in college, away from home, with quote real world people demanding things of me and not knowing how to maneuver through that, that I really understood that I definitely had different limitations than other people. Um, I, I I think that was because my mom was such an amazing mom. My mom was a nurse, and she was, anybody who was raised by a medical professional knows if it's not bleeding and a limb isn't worth at risk of falling off, you're going to be fine. And
Yeah.
that was kind of the tack she took with me as well. We definitely had our normal daughter mother struggles, probably to an nth degree, because there was also the complexity of caretaker and patient in that as well.
Yeah.
Um, but my mom was never a person, my parents were never people to coddle me in the fact that put me in a glass bubble and leave me there and not let me do things. And the example I always give was I was 10 years old and I wanted to play soccer because all my friends were playing soccer. Looking back on that, I'm not an athlete, I'm an artist. I don't know why I wanted to do that, but
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
And my mom was like, great, let's go try it. And to this day, I have my little participation trophy that says Best Improved Player sitting on my mantle at home from 1986.
Wow.
Because that's the thing, probably in my young life, that I was most proud of, that I tried something that I wasn't good at and I was allowed to do that. I wasn't, oh no, you're going to get hurt, or oh no, it's going to make you worse. Oh no, you could have a seizure and fall down and crack your skull. My parents were never like that in my life. So I think I didn't really realize it was limitations until other people put them on me. And that was really trying to get through undergrad and trying to get through school. And I mean, sure, and high school kids are totally disastrous. I mean, but they're disastrous to everybody, especially creative people. I mean, I found my nerdy tribe and was in art and band and music and all that. So I even in high school didn't feel, I felt different other at times, but had a good community of people who didn't even think about it. It wasn't until I got out in the grown-up world and had to do grown-up things that I really kind of realized those limitations. And I think, to what we were talking about before we got on here, I think that's the blessing and the curse of being young and being having a disability from my perspective. And again, I always say this: the disabled experience is not a monolith, so I'm not speaking for anyone. other than myself in this journey. But my whole life was built around what I could and couldn't do with the body I was given and the issues I was given. I have a friend who had to give up ballet when she was a teenager and she wanted to dance with the New York City Ballet because she got sick. And that's a much different experience that I just didn't have. So I have probably a much more adapted viewpoint on that
Yeah.
because it's definitely just one of those things that I always had these. I don't have conscious memories without having these things to deal with. And kids are so adaptable that I think I've taken that on to my life. There were no sacrifices that I had to give up anything that I loved because everything I loved was found in the framework of having these things to deal with.
So, what was your earliest dream of what you wanted to be when you grew up? Was there a desire that you had, a profession you wanted to get in?
I wanted to be a teacher.
Okay.
I'd say
So,
all the a teacher or a child life specialist,
okay.
which I dealt with a lot of child life specialists in hospitals and doctors' offices and things like that. Those are kind of the two things I bounced between um, pretty much all the way through high school. Um, because I was always told you'd never make money being an artist. I mean, deep down,
Right.
that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to
Yeah.
be a creative, but I come from a family where my dad has had a law degree, an engineering degree. He was a real estate broker. He was a math teacher. I mean, he was a Renaissance man. My mom had a PhD in education. I didn't come from a place where that would have been an acceptable career path. Now you have to remember I'm also old enough that my high school years predate the internet. So it was a much different experience of talking about how to be a creative than it would be for someone now. So I'd say deep down that's probably what I wanted to do, but I was always telling people I wanted to be a teacher or a social worker.
So, we probably know the answer to this, but ultimately, at the end of the day, when you look at your life and everything that you've had to overcome and evolve into at this point, who's that hero, that inspiration for you?
Oh wow. Um, there's a couple. Like my mom was an entrepreneur. She ran her own business. She ran very successful. She was a business consultant and she owned a franchise of mastermind groups and she was the top. She was the only woman who owned the franchise and she was the most successful franchisee until she retired. So I think from my entrepreneurial stuff definitely came from my mother. My creative stuff came from my uncle. My uncle was an opera singer in Germany, and with my aunt. My aunt is now a tenured vocal professor in Southern California. My paternal grandmother was an artist. She was painting and drawing and stuff like that. So I say that. And then I've had a couple really amazing professional mentors in my career. Early on, I worked in politics. I worked for a congressman and worked on his campaign in the late 90s. And the political consultant there was a really key factor in helping me find my voice as an advocate and in politics. Professionally, I belong to a great group of women who do what I do for a living. So it's always great to have those women in my back pocket when things are getting frustrated. And I mean, I've had a few things happen over the last couple of weeks that definitely were sexist and rude, and I know who I can go to who understands that. And and in all those instances too, a mentor is not just someone who shows you what to do, but sometimes they show you what not to do. And I would say in all those instances, especially with my mother, there's certain things she showed me that I could do, and there's certain things she showed me I never wanted to do in my life. So, I would say I have a great circle of women around me in various capacities throughout my life that have shown me kind of given me that guidance at whatever I needed at those points.
I'd mentioned before, and before we got on, my son, who's 20, is on the spectrum, and I've been keyed into the special needs disability community for quite some time. And I saw recently there was a list of people that you just wouldn't expect would have had a disability. Like Dan Aykroyd had Asperger's, and like we have Temple Grade, and we have other people that are very big disability advocates that have done a lot with their lives. Who's that
Yeah.
person that you've admired that maybe you would like to meet and talk to see how they've dealt with it that may help you in your journey in life? Is there anybody like that?
I have plenty of people like that have just become friends through my advocacy work. There's plenty of people. I have a couple people in my life who were diagnosed with the same things I was as children, so we have that lived experience together. Um, I would love to meet Molly Burke. She's a blind YouTuber. I just love her general attitude about her disability and how she speaks about it, I think has been really inspiring to me on my journey of becoming. I took a long break from advocacy, like 10, 15 years. I was in school, I was trying to get my business off the ground and coming back to it, watching that. And there's a woman who goes by the name of Footless Joe. She is an amputee, also the same. She's very much like me. She was very active. She does a lot of things and she kind of shows that you can do anything. She trains martial arts. She does a lot of, she's physically active, and I run marathons and do a lot of things. So she's also someone I would love to meet. But I would say really it's the people who I look up to are my small community of advocates who I have found working through the organizations I've worked through, who shared their stories alongside me, because it always reminds me of how far I've come, and hearing some of them are 10 or 15 years younger than me. So hearing their stories of trying to have kids and getting married and having things reminds me of how far I've come. But those Molly and Joe are the two people that I haven't met that I would love to meet at some point.
I think the thing that's synonymous in the community, the disability or special needs community, um, is that there's a certain amount of loss because people don't understand it. The quote throughout the quote that you said up front, I love it. If you don't have it, or if you don't know someone that has it, you don't understand it.
Oh, if you don't know someone that has it, you will at some point in your life. You're one small accident away from being disabled. Someone in your life could be disabled tomorrow in a car accident or get hit. I have a friend who has a friend who was just hit
Yeah.
but on his bike, you know. And as we get older, disability becomes far more prevalent. I mean, my dad had strokes and couldn't talk and couldn't feed himself and stuff. So the majority of people will have a disability in their life of some point at some point. And so I think the big thing is that people, when they see people like me or they hear about disabled people, a lot of people want to push it aside because they don't want to think about it. You know, I think the big thing is that being out front and being active, I don't know. I've had people tell me it kind of makes them uncomfortable because it puts them in touch with their mortality. I've had that told to me more than once. And I'm like, I get it, but I'm here existing and thriving. That should not be what you think about, right? Versus I'm going to die someday. Yeah, we're all going to die someday. But if you're looking at me and that's the first thing you think about rather than thinking about my successes, you need to retune your brain to what disability is.
So, and along those lines, when you do deal with this world, there's a certain amount of people that you lose because they don't understand and they're not going to
Sure.
understand. And you just simply get to a point where you have to let it go. How
Yeah.
have you taken those losses and dings in your life and turned it into positive fuel for you to be who you are and to do the best you can? I mean, how do you compartmentalize that and move on?
Yeah, I always say people come into your life for a season or and a reason, you know, and that's kind of the way I look at it. You know, not everyone is meant to be your friend for your entire life or be a part of your journey for your entire life. So really, when people fall away, like they did at the beginning of the pandemic, I'm like, okay, that season of my life of you being in it and you being important is gone. And hopefully I served the purpose I was meant to serve in your life. I kind of look at it that way. I've always kind of come into people's lives in periods of transition, a lot of, and so I don't ever really see myself as a person who stays in someone's. I have my core group of friends who I've known forever and my family and stuff, but I don't always I don't go into a friendship thinking it's going to be forever. I kind of am a catalyst for changing people's life when I enter it. And when that change is done, whatever it needs to be, people just kind of naturally fall off. That's kind of the way it's been my entire life. And I think I've realized as an adult, that's my purpose in people's lives. So I don't necessarily get hurt by it. I'm just like my job in your life is done now is kind of the way I approach it. And I don't even think that has anything to do with my disability, just more of who I am as a person. It's like I don't attach to people in that way. And I never really have. It's like, okay, you're here now. What are we both getting from this? And if it's not mutually beneficial, peace be to you on your journey and continue on. And I'm never that black and white thinker who shuts anybody completely out. If someone wanted to come back 10 years later and have a conversation, I'm always open for that. But
Yeah.
I think that comes from understanding the up and down nature of life, you
Yeah.
know, just from having a disability and having stuff thrown at me my entire life. But it also comes from just the experiences I've had up to this point in my life. I'm almost 50, and in almost 50 years of experience, that's always kind of been what I've seen
Yeah.
play out in my friendships and my relationships time and time again.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I look at it.
So, what is it that gets you up every day to do the work that you do? and to evolve as a human being? What is that gas in your tank every day?
Well, it's twofold. Well, actually, it's the cats who bite my feet at 5 a.m. that literally starts every day.
Yeah.
Um, but on my advocacy side of the world, it's because so many people are not in a position to speak. I run my own business. I'm not afraid of losing my job. I'm not afraid of speaking up and speaking out. And there's so many people who are not in that same position. And so I always say when I have conversations like this, I'm speaking for every person who's like me, who doesn't feel comfortable standing up or who can't for whatever reason. And that always gets me out of bed. And I think the biggest thing is the young kids who are diagnosed in childhood with the same things I was
Yeah.
and speaking so they have a better existence than I did.
Yeah.
Um, whether that's I do a lot of advocacy on healthcare reform because here in the United States, it's a train wreck. I'm sure with your son trying to get him services has probably been an utter nightmare. So you know firsthand what that is. Uh, so so a lot of the work I do around healthcare advocacy and healthcare reform is exactly for that little 8-year-old me who, if my mom wasn't a nurse, it probably would have taken 2 to 3 years to get diagnosed. That's for rheumatoid arthritis. The last time I looked at any data for pediatric rheumatoid arthritis, it's a 2 to 3 year diagnosis period, and that does a lot of permanent damage to your body. So a lot of what I do is with that kind of stuff in mind for that next generation, and also to show them what you can be capable of.
Yeah.
I didn't start my business to be that, but I do see a lot of people looking to me and going, wow, she has all this, three really serious disabilities and she's able to do this. And that's a fine line of what we call inspiration porn, which is being inspiration for a non-disabled person who normally what they mean by that is, I'm glad I'm not you. Right. And I
Right.
get that a lot. Oh, you're such an inspiration. And my question is always, well, what do I inspire you to do? Silence on the other end. But the people who I do inspire are the people who I can say, hey, I was you at 8 years old and look at what I can do. So that inspiration piece is always a double-edged sword. And then professionally, I love what I do. I love product design. I love building things. I love creating things. And it's no more satisfaction professionally for me than sitting down at the beginning of the day and something exists in the world at the end of the day because I created it. There's nothing more satisfying to that. But going back to what I said about being a teacher, I also teach and coach new designers as well. So that's also something um, um, that I actually did end up doing, teaching, not in the way I
Yeah.
meant it, but
Sure.
I do that as well. And working with the up and coming new designers who are getting passionate about what I'm passionate about is also something that just gets me through. And there are days where I don't get out of bed and I take Vicodin and I pass out and that's all I can do and all I can function. And I'm very fortunate that I run my own company and I'm able to do that. I don't have a 9 to 5 job, and I don't think I could hold down a traditional 9 to 5 job with my health the way it is. So I just never done that.
Yeah.
So I've built the entire thing around what works for me, and making a difference in people's lives and creativity are the things that get me up.
So what's the best advice you've ever gotten in your life?
The best advice I've ever gotten in my life is well, it's twofold. Professionally, my dad gave me the best piece of advice is find people whose strengths are your weaknesses. When I started my business, I was 20, almost 21, 20, almost 21. And my dad was like, well, you're not good at math, find yourself an accountant. Um, so professionally, that's the best piece of advice I was ever given. And the other piece of advice, also from my father, that's more of a personal piece, is life is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
My dad would always say that to me when I would get overwhelmed, especially when I was doing my undergrad. Hey, if it takes you another semester, you're going to be 4 months older, whether you're doing that or not. Keep moving forward. And
Yeah.
those are probably the two best pieces of advice I've ever gotten. And that's still one, even though my dad's been gone a couple of years, I kind of hold on to when things get overwhelming. Just
Yeah.
take that one small step forward, and you're still making forward progress. You don't have to do it all in one day.
Totally. Yeah. So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Of everything that you've had to overcome and you've evolved into and accomplished, what are you the proudest of?
Getting out of a wheelchair.
Yeah.
I say getting out of a wheelchair and running my first half marathon probably are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Um, there's a period before the Affordable Care Act where I couldn't afford insurance. I'd come off my parents' insurance and ended up in a really bad way. And I worked really, really hard to get out of that. And part of my reward for getting out of that was I wanted to say I'd run a marathon. Now I ran and my first half marathon I did with an organization called Team in Training. They're a fundraising arm of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. I wanted, if I was going to do it, I wanted to have a reason behind it. So my goddaughter is a cancer survivor. So I did it in honor of her 5th year in remission. And I was the absolute last person in on that half marathon. And it's still one of the things I'm proudest of, because if I said I have epilepsy and arthritis, you wouldn't attach marathoner to that. And now I've done 3 full marathons and 11 half marathons, and I did triathlons and all that stuff. It was kind of the start of that. But that was within 18 months of getting out of the wheelchair. So I would say, getting to the point where I needed that chair and then being able to pull myself out of it. And there's still days I walk with a cane, and there's still days that I need it, but I'm not in it all the time now. And that I worked my butt off for. And then put my body through 13 miles in 100-degree heat in May. Hey, I did it. I did that. That was very much a I'm going to show you what I can do thing. And I did it. And like I said, I was the absolute last person because I jacked up my knee in the last 3 miles, hobbled to the finish line. But because people told me I couldn't do it, I say I'm kind of that stubborn person.
Yeah.
Those two things people told me I wouldn't do. Therefore, those are the things I'm proudest I was able to accomplish.
That's awesome. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, clients, colleagues, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I say most people probably have me pretty pegged. I'm passionate, I'm fiery, I'm a little hot-headed, but I'm loyal. I'm fiercely loyal, sometimes loyal to my own detriment. I'm creative. I'm always doing something creative and passionate. But all my friends and all my people know that I won't do anything to help anybody.
Yeah.
To a point, I have learned boundaries in the last few years that people are still getting accustomed to. The pandemic definitely taught me how to put in some healthy boundaries for myself. So sometimes there's pushback on that. But I would say I'm probably the best person I've ever been at this point because I've done all the work. I've done the therapy. I've done the mental work to understand who I am and be able to present that as an honest piece of who I am. But I'm a loyal, creative, passionate person. That's how I would put it in a nutshell.
I totally see it. So if anyone, Catherine, wants to reach out, they want to learn more, any of the good business in your world, where can they go?
All social media, I'm Starweaver. I'm primarily on Instagram. That's my primary social thing. Websites and stuff are kind of always in flux, so I always say that's the best place to reach out.
Okay. This has been wonderful. Catherine, thank you for your energy. Thank you for your story. It's wonderful. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely.